is not a speech. Actually, it probably deserves some kind of inspirational speech, but I don't have it ready. This is kind of 4 PowerPoint slides. They all look different, but each one is a framework that might be useful for you in thinking about your plans. And I'll certainly leave that with you, and maybe only one of the 4 is useful, but I hope something here is useful. So I'm just going to walk you through that. It'll actually leave us time. That's why I'm saying down here instead of there, because I would love to interact a little with you as we go through it at the end. So my first slide. I do teach citizen engagement at Tufts University, and so people say, what is a citizen or what is engagement? And I say, citizen is defined by someone who simply asks a 4-word question. Very simple 4-word question, but takes it seriously. What should we do? And it's worth just taking a minute to think about each of the 4 words. So if you're an active citizen, a serious citizen, it's about what you do, not merely what you think or what emotions you feel or what you wish would happen, but what you do. I think you're striving to do something by being here today, but that's a word to keep in mind. The question is, and this is the hardest part, the question is what should we do? Meaning some real group that gathers together and can decide. So the one pitfall is always thinking about what can I do. 2 problems with that. One is I can't do very much alone. I can't accomplish much. Another problem is I can't think very well by myself. I need to be in some kind of group with other people to check my ideas. So it's about me. It's also not about what should be done. That is such a pitfall, right? So I'll give you an example. Climate change. I assume lots of people are concerned about that in this room. Am I right? So the question, what should be done about climate change? The problem with that is it's too easy. Right? So I mean, we can answer that very easily. Less carbon should be consumed. Or governments all over the world should tax carbon. Problem solved. But we can't make that happen. We don't get to decide what the global carbon tax is. And it's too easy also to say, well, what should we simply do right here as a little group? Like, let's make sure to switch off the lights when we leave this room. The hard part is, what should we, a group like this that gathers together here, do that has an impact on a larger scale? So can we keep the subject focused on ourselves constantly, right? And it's actually a real difficult discipline because you'll find yourself looking into what should happen instead of what should we do. And of course, it's what should we do, so it's not what we want to do, what do we feel like, what our preference is, it's what's right. And since you can't just look up what's right in some authoritative source, and since people disagree, that's a tough question. But that's our job, to try to figure out what we should do. It's about what are the right ends, and also what are the right means and methods. And, you know what I'm going to highlight next. Of course, it's also what should we do, meaning that it's up to us to figure out what are the actual, real options available to us. What are their costs, what are their difficulties, what are their risks, and choose among them. So I think that's the question. Next slide is different. So I told you 4 different frameworks. In a book that I wrote before Barack Obama was president, before Donald Trump, I said that I thought what we needed to have good citizenship in a country like the United States was 4 things: deliberation, collaboration, and civic relationships. Donald Trump challenges me to think about whether that's still true, and whether this is a little too static and soft and not edgy enough. But I'm going to present it, and then I'm going to say it's so okay. So, just quickly, there are 3 words up there. One of it is to deliberate. So good citizens, I think, to deliberate is to talk with other people about what we should do, and to have some diversity of opinion in that group, not to all be on the same page. And you do that because, well, frankly, because we're all stupid unless we do that, right? We need other people to challenge us, to have different perspectives. We need to listen. So we do need to deliberate. But it's not enough to get a group together to just talk about what they believe in or what they value. You actually have to do something. And you have to work together. So collaborate, the root word there is labor, work together. So people make things as citizens. And those 2 things go very nicely together because, so those people are lifting build walls to make a Habitat for Humanity house. So they're, by the picture, you can tell they're collaborating. I mean, they'll often be lifting the wall at the same time or fall down. But the question is, did they also deliberate? Did they talk about whether that house was needed, whether that was the best way to spend their effort and money, what the root causes of homelessness are in their community? And did the people on the left do something? So the people who I've labeled as deliberate, who by the way are some friends of mine. So So deliberation and collaboration need to go together. And then the relationship piece. So that lady is meeting very much like this, and what she's doing is so typical. She's turning around in her chair talking to people behind her while there's some person on the stage giving a speech. And so she's there probably because the civic relationships brought her into the place, and she also wants relationships. So relationships are a scarce, but they are a renewable source of power for communities. All right, so there is this too sort of soft and touchy-feely and static for a moment when I believe the Republic is under threat and the White House is occupied by a malevolent force. If you don't quite agree with that, that's fine, but that's where I go. So I would still say this is what we need, with some caveats. First of all, we need this because it's by participating in these ways, collaborating and forming relationships, that Americans have traditionally learned what to expect from our leaders. So in my opinion, Donald Trump is the opposite of deliberative, the opposite of collaborative, and has very poor relationships in the way that he acts publicly. So why do people like that? Possibly because they're not experiencing deliberation, collaboration, and civic relationships in their everyday life. In fact, in a survey, from a national representative survey that we did this spring, we asked Americans a series of questions that were a little more user-friendly than do you deliberate. But the bottom line for us was 28% of Americans are in any kind of group at this time in their life that they think has any kind of conversation that's meaningful. And so if you've got 72% of Americans not experiencing that, I would submit they don't know how to pick good leaders. And so building this up is a way of building up a better sense of leadership. By the way, that would be true of people who are conservative and entitled to their beliefs, but why would they like a kind of leader like Donald Trump unless they had experienced this kind of, if they had experienced this kind of leadership? So the other point is that social movements that actually shake things up, that actually change things, that are much more adversarial and, change-oriented, like this one, that's Dr. Martin Luther King on the way to Montgomery in 1965, and the Selma to Montgomery March. They also, so that's not touchy-feely, that's people got beaten to almost to death just a little before that, and those people are marching to the Capitol when they are changing the law. But they had to deliberate, collaborate, and form civic relationships to be effective. I think if you look carefully at the history of the civil rights movement, you'll find that it's full of disagreements and deliberation internally. It's full of forces collaboration. It takes collaborative work to get those people all to show up the same day. And they had relationships. And so deliberation, collaboration, and civic relationships can be, it's like an engine that you can wind up and you can then move it forward. And I'm not saying that we can be satisfied with it staying still. We have to move it forward. But I still think it's at the root of what we need. That was the second slide. Third slide. I want to suggest to you that any, this one's blank. No, I'm about to populate it. This would be the bad news. So any organization, movement, group that's involved in politics can be categorized according to two categories, or two dimensions. There's the first one, but it needs to be labeled. So a group can be either big, it can have a lot of scale, or it can be deep, and have a lot of depth. Scale means a lot of people. So, the civil rights movement, lots of people. Depth means a lot of transformation. It means that the people who come into the movement come out different. That they gain skills, that they gain motives, that they gain values, that they gain relationships. That's what you're doing in a building like this today when you start doing sessions on skill building. So organizations can be either big, or they can be deep, or maybe both. But those two things are in some tension because the more people you have, the harder it is to go deep. The more deep you go, the harder it is to be big. Also, groups can either be unified or they can be diverse. They can either demonstrate unity or plurality. Right? So unity is very valuable. All those people marching on the Selma to Montgomery March, they're all marching together, same day, same song, same leader. But they're also plural. They were African American people in that march, but they were white people in that march. They were Protestants, they were Catholics. And unity and pluralism are both valuable, but they also tend to be in tension because the more unity you have, the harder it is to maintain some the more pluralism you have, the harder it is to be unified. So I think you can get all of those things. Oh, by the way, the scale, pluralism, unity, depth spells SPUD, so that's my little line. All right, so do we have SPUD? And I guess at this point I want to challenge you. Do you have SPUD? So some groups do. I mean, this is the global Catholic Church, right? I just use it because it's familiar to everybody, whether you're Catholic or not. Scale, over 1 billion members. Depth, transformation for at least some people. I mean, there are Catholic saints who were deeply transformed. There are clergy, there are people who are in depth. It achieves depth. Unified, there's one Pope, there's one Vatican, there's one catechism. But pluralism too. It's a global church, lots of colors, lots of flavors, and lots of different, even theological beliefs. Although I didn't go very pluralist because the Catholic Church doesn't encompass Protestants and Jews and Muslims and atheists. So it's plural, but not perfectly plural. Does this make some sense? All right. Here's one. Now, a lot of community organizing groups, I understand there's a familial affiliate here. Is that familiar? I guess that's what there is. Community organizing groups tend to achieve depth, lots of change for the people who are involved, and lots of unity, bringing people together. But they struggle with scale, so their size is not very big. And if you don't have a lot of scale, you don't have a lot of power. So the challenge for community organizing is to get bigger. Move On. Anybody involved with Move On? So that's big, lots of members. But I interviewed Alan Gallen, who runs Move On, and she said, well, our two problems are, we don't go very deep, so people don't change as a result of being involved in Move On. It doesn't call them to change, it doesn't give them skills or values they didn't have before. And also, we can't handle diversity of opinion. So literally, if they have less than 60% consensus on a topic, they drop it by rule, because they can't, in the format of Move On, work through a different disagreement. So they have to have a high degree of consensus. So they're up on the top left. I don't know, the Democratic Party, pretty big, pretty plural, not very deep, not very unified. You might disagree. It doesn't matter to me very much whether my allocations of these circles are correct. But what I would suggest to you is you need SPUD. So you need some scale, or you're not going to win. You need some depth, or you're not going to change people and make them effective leaders. You need some plurality, because groups without plurality get dumb. Right? They don't challenge themselves, and they also can't talk to people outside because they're not used to hearing the other side, so they can't communicate effectively. And you need unity. You need moments when you come together like in a room like this. So have you got SPUD? All right. Slide number, 1, 2, 3, I guess I've got 4. Slide number 3, is that correct? 4. Thank you, you're very helpful. Slide number 4, so I guess I have 5, I apologize. So, 4 levels of power, and here I'm drawing on my friend Archon Fong, who's a scholar, and look him up, and some other people. So this is not original to me at all. But I'll just run through this quickly, and then I'll suggest that you need to think about all 4 levels. So, one level involves just an individual facing a problem. It's a case, it's a situation. Like it's an employee, and it's you who's being discriminated against. And so what you have to do to fight that is challenge that discrimination. Talk to the boss, file a lawsuit. You're dealing with that one case. Another level of power, you might decide instead, or in addition, to challenge the general rules or policies. Maybe there isn't a policy or law that protects against that kind of discrimination. So your act would be to pass a law. 2 more left. I think those 2 levels of power are fairly familiar. I want to tell you there's 2 more. You can also change who decides the rules or policies. So, traditionally, one of the reasons you form a union is to bargain for a different collective bargaining contract that then sets the rules and policies. So different people are at the table to decide on the rules, namely the union officials as well as the owners of the business. So you've changed who decides. We could run this with the case instead of voting. The first one would be a student at Eau Claire is blocked from voting. The second is the rules about voting are somehow suppressing the vote. The third is the people in charge of deciding on the rules of voting in Wisconsin are the state legislature without a check from someone else, like a judiciary. And the Fourth question is, what's on the public's agenda? How are people thinking about issues in general? What matters to people? So you could, for example, to go back to the discrimination case, instead of challenging a specific example of discrimination, or changing the law, or changing who decides, you can change the public's view of what counts as discrimination. We've seen discrimination against trans people suddenly become a much more widespread concern. Right? So you can work at all four of those levels. You can work on protecting the individual, changing the rules, deciding who decides, or changing what the public values. I would suggest in general, and this could be wrong, but I would suggest that the right in America is much better at the bottom two rows, and the left is much more stuck on the first two, and that's a source of weakness for the left. So I challenge you with that. All right, and the last one, and this one I'm going to leave up as we talk and after I leave you. This is something that I put up on my blog 1 year ago, and whatever, one day, right after the election. I've actually been blogging since, that is, writing a blog post almost every day since January 2003. So lots of blogs, most of them no one pays any attention to. This one, for some reason, did go a little bit viral, at least by my standards. So more people have used this than everything else I've ever done all put together. So it's being used in groups like this. And I was just trying to think of the different ways that anybody could respond. I said how to respond, but I didn't say to Donald Trump being elected because I wanted to be a little more open. How to respond to the current crisis, however you define it. And so if you look across the top row, 4 things you might be worried about. And of course you might be worried about more than these, or you might be worried about something else that I forgot about. But are you concerned about winning the next election? Resisting the powers that be? Repairing our torn civic fabric? Or reforming the political system? 4 different things. They could go together, but they are 4 different things. If you're interested in winning the next election, is that by changing who turns out and perhaps how the voter rules work so that a different winner comes out with more or less the same 2-party system? Or is it about totally changing the coalitions, at least the Democratic Party, but maybe scrambling the whole coalition division in the United States? If you're interested in resisting the administration, are you more an institutional kind of person who might contemplate working within a formal system like the government itself or a university? Or are you more an outsider? Are you more interested in challenging, standing outside, almost literally outside of the picnic side? If you're interested in repairing the fabric, are you mostly concerned, when I say fabric, that's very vague, are you mostly concerned about communities, specific communities that might be vulnerable or traumatized right now? People who are facing deportation, people who feel assault on their dignity. Or are you mostly concerned that we don't talk across partisan and ideological divisions in the United States, so that liberals don't talk to conservatives and conservatives don't talk to liberals? And if you're interested in reforming politics, are you mainly concerned that there's an assault on important values that have been in place, and you want to protect them, and you see things like the rule of law as being threatened? Or do you think that the rules were lousy before 1 year ago, and your goal is to change those rules? I'm not going to run all the way through the bottom row here, but each of those cells is a thing you might set out to do. And what I want you to just think about is that, well, you can do more than one thing, and you can be in more than one cell, and also it's quite likely that we need people in all those cells. But you as an individual and you as a group or network is going to have a hard time being in all those cells. Partly because it shoots too much to take on, and partly because they're a little bit in tension. So if you want to be deeply into ideologically diverse deliberation and listening, which is over there near the right, it's going to be pretty hard for you also to be organizing and mobilizing people to win the next election for the Democratic side. I mean, you're just going to have a hard time being credible as the convener of ideologically diverse conversations and as somebody who's trying to win the next, an election in a mere, well, I guess it's election in April, right? So, you could think about ways to do both. Maybe take some partnership. Maybe you do some of the first cell, and then you do some of the other cell with a conservative group or something. Or maybe you just don't see yourself in some of these cells at all. This is not my advocacy to you to do one of these things instead of another. This is my suggestion that you probably have to find your way through some kind of combination of these things. Or me that those cells are not the right cells, that would be really awesome. I would love to find that out and learn. So I presented what I wanted to present, and I do not have to go to the airport for another 15 minutes. So I'm going to leave that up, and these slides are all available in case they're useful to you. But any questions, comments, responses, reactions, denunciations? Yes, sir. Oh, thanks for having me. That was very polite. Less polite is okay. Howard is like Bill, can I, or,
yes.
Can I just, if they're on the computers?
You can send them to everybody who's registered via email.
Yeah.
So as an OWR person, I think the Democratic message is wrong. How do you see that fitting into this?
You think the Democratic Party's message is wrong?
And I see,
Yeah.
I see what you have here as a way for a solution to that problem.
Yeah, so I think you probably don't want to be in the cell at the bottom left, which is more about just getting out, just changing who wins for or less the existing Democratic coalition. You probably either want to develop new ideas that can draw in more people and change the electorate, or to some extent, some of the changes in politics on the right there, because you may think that the Democratic Party is too embedded with existing policies that you want to see change. Does that help?
Yeah.
But I think that's a great point, because these are the kinds of things speaking to liberation, these are the kind of things we need to just deliberate about. There isn't a right answer, but there are multiple perspectives. So, for example, for a group like this, the question of how to position yourself with respect to the Democratic Party, I just say deliberate on that. I don't have advice, but think about it. Yeah.
And that, I guess the preserving the regime title, to me, that seems like you want to maintain status quo, but if you look at the action items that are there,
Yeah.
it seems different than preserving the regime. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So did everybody hear the question? Is it preserving the regime sounds very, in a way, conservative, a little cease conservative. It sounds like it's just about holding on to something that we are already doing. And yet the actual activities are things like investigative journalism and court oversight and stuff. So I get, yeah, actually, my label may be bad. I'm not wedded to the label. But the idea here is that our regime, the best parts of it are very vulnerable. And so in order to hold on, in order to stay where we are, we have a lot of hard work to do. So if the President of the United States is violating the Emoluments Clause, which nobody's ever violated before, then it's not about passing an Emoluments Clause, because we've got one. It's about investigating what that means. It's about prosecuting, right? So that preserving the regime may require an intense activity. So it's not it can be a very activist call. But also, I'm happy to change or you should change the name of it if you like a different name. Yes?
So, remember the previous slide with the moves prevent
Yeah.
power stuff? Can you riff for a second on how that interlaces with your next one?
Yeah, I'll try. Yeah. Ruth is really smart. So that's a hard one. I know that from the past. I think it's a sort of, so I guess what I would do is I would put through any strategies you're thinking of actually doing. Like we got an April election. What are we doing? So I would put that through two filters, the previous one and this one. So I would ask, are we trying to get individuals to vote? Are we trying to change the rules about voting? Are we trying to change who vote? But then I would also pass it through this. That are we just trying to win the election with a Democratic coalition? Are we trying to use it as an opportunity to work with vulnerable, traumatized communities, which might make sense? I mean, are there people who are not voting because they're afraid to vote and can address their fear? So I think they just kind of, yeah, there's probably a more sophisticated answer, but I think there are two sets of things to think about as you struggle with any choice.
Do you see us bouncing back and forth between those two slides and kind of checking on
Yeah, and asking about SPUD, if I may. Asking whether what you're doing is plural, large, deep, and unified.
Going back to the previous slide, where you mentioned the different levels of power, and it struck me, yes, that the left is like we've got, you know, some diversity here. But it seems to me, obviously, the left has used the bottom two to their advantage and have succeeded.
The right is
The right,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
correct.
Yeah. So I mean, these get harder as they go down. I do think, you know, the left has had some remarkable success on some of the agenda issues. So you know, same-sex marriage really changed public opinion dramatically, and that's what changed the rules. So you know, that's an interesting example because the Supreme Court has said that you have a right to marry, but the Supreme Court came after the public agenda had changed. So the left sometimes comes there. I actually think the place where the left is the least creative is the who decides thing. Because the thing, so unions are great. You have a union. I'm for unions. I've written about that. But unions are 150 years old. And the question is, how do we, and so they should be restored, and I want to see them restored. But what other tools do we have to change who decides? And there are examples where the left, I'm not sure if I can get these accurately right, but the left has really bobbled that, or dropped that opportunity by failing to use legislation to change who's at the table, and instead just trying to get better short-term rules and policies. And that's a mistake. So be thinking about who's at the table. Way over there. Yes?
Yeah, me again.
Yes, go ahead.
The last two seem to me to be a cultural embedded ideology that says, I need someone to make a decision for me. So like the Catholic Church, you saw how that works, right? So I think the left is stuck in a religious conundrum where they can't change, and that's where we fall short. That we don't explain how we are just as moral and ethical as they are. And I like to call not having Medicare for all age onset abortion.
That took a while to sink in. So yeah, well, you know, this is explicitly moral, right? At the end, and you know, you might this takes a long time to go back. You might not want to go that way with me, but that's. I think the question is, what should we do as a community, as a network like this, and as a nation? And that's an explicitly moral question. It's not a question of what we just want to do or what our identities favor or something like that. It's a question of what's right for the country. And you have to own that. Of course, you also have to deliberate because your opinion about what's right is not trustworthy unless you challenge it against other people's. But it's the combination of making moral commitments. We heard about commitments from Vince Lombardi. Making moral commitments and also being open to the possibility that you're wrong. That is at the heart of society. Yes?
Just on your levels of power chart, just to comment a little bit on the psychology of all this. I think one of the reasons why maybe that conservatives are better at some of these than progressives are is that it's easy to play on people's fears and it's easy to play on short-term goals. And a lot of the stuff, at least in my mind, a lot of the things that we're looking for are not fear-based.
Right.
They're completely opposite of fear-based. And they're long-term goals. And that's a harder sell to the basic psychology of how most people are.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I don't think it's just the right that's an issue here. There is a certain toolkit that became popular on the left in the 1970s, which is a very patronizing view of the citizen. It says, you know, people are not paying attention to politics, they're not very connected to each other, relationships are frayed, so the thing you can do is scare the Jesus out of the people you talk to. So, you know, there's the kind of scripted style of politics which has been taught and learned quite a bit on the left, which is to say you knock on someone's door and you tell them they're trying to kill you by polluting sign or big money. And so I think that's an internal struggle. The people, you know, that was well-intentioned, and the people on the other side are not bad people, but we have to learn a different style. That's destructive of relationships, and relationships are the source of power. And it's destructive of leadership development. So the person you knock on the person's door, you want to view that person as someone who could be consular ally with you, not as somebody you need to scare. And then the test of that is whether you're willing to go off script. So if your script is, you know, Scott Walker's going to kill you. Okay, but then what if the person doesn't agree with that or has some other concern? What do you say next? And I think there's a certain scripting on the left which says, no, Scott Walker's going to kill you, regardless of what the response is, and that's killing us. It's also unethical, but I also think it's ineffective. Yeah.
What do you think about, the move on style of that, trying to limit what the goals are? I mean, how do we approach that? Because we have so many issues, so many opinions. Where would we guide
So I don't necessarily think that the move-on style is bad in the whole ecosystem. I think you want to have some places where you can have an easy connect and where you can just find people who agree and you can just get stuff moving. After all, they started with a particular petition to censor and move on Bill Clinton, if you remember that. It was a concrete thing, it was quick, and it was efficient. So I think it has a role. I think a group like this can use move on, right? But it's not sufficient because it's leaving out the need for things like liberating people who are different from us and changing and learning. And so it's not doing it for us by itself. And so it's a tool, it's not the end, and we have to do better. And you have the opportunity to do better. If you can get 150 people to show up on a chilly Sunday in November to tables like this where you know each other's names, where you can learn each other's names, we can do better than just move on. And I say that with fondness for move on within its limits. There's an admiration for what they accomplished within its limits. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is about the Women's March and partly how much spud you saw. So, I was very heartened and excited by the Women's March. They, as we all know, they struggled a little with pluralism in a couple of different ways. One was whether they needed to be, everybody needed to be pro-choice or not. And they have the right to decide that if there's an issue. Another was racial diversity. So they struggled, I think, a little with pluralism. They certainly, it's a good example because it scaled. It was supposedly the biggest protest in American history. And it was unified, and some of the, the pink hats and everything, that's unity, right? That's unity. The depth, I don't know, because you wouldn't get that from a single day, but the question is, do some of those women and others, because there were others there too, learn and grow and form relationships that persist? And of course, the biggest question is how do you sustain that? Because we'd be in a better, it would be too much to ask, but we would be in a better place if there was Women's March every month instead of just, I'm waiting for the next one. Yeah.
If we're talking about trying to be deliberative, can you speak a little bit about the partisanship in media consumption and how do you have communications with people who don't receive communication?
Yeah, so the question is about media polarization and how that affects being deliberative. Well, this is why, I don't know that your job is ideologically diverse deliberation and listening, but it's somebody's job, because we have a problem with that. That is to say, this may be a sort of left of center group and just got a bunch of work to do, and God bless you, but some people have got to do this ideologically diverse listening, because we are tremendously polarized. And it's not the disagreement so much, which is fine, but it's the real loathing of people on the other side of the division. And it's also the dependence on media sources that are very one-sided, to put it mildly. There's deep reasons for that. It sells. It's a lot cheaper to run a cable news station where you just cater to a particular group and have to tell them you can't say outrageous things. It's cheap, right? It's very profitable. So that's what we're fighting against. And I'll say one more thing, and then I think maybe we should actually go to the airport, which is, pure deliberation ideas can get everybody. You get the most, I saw an InfoWars sticker on a car in downtown Eau Claire, you have that guy here. And deliberation would be everybody. There's something valuable that's less than that, which is not everybody. You're a movement, you're entitled to agree on stuff, but still trying to prize some degree of plurality, of difference, because otherwise you get dull. I've said it 3 or 4 times. If you're all on the same page, you get dull. So the disagreement in the room is an asset, it's a value. It doesn't mean that this room has to include the people who tune into InfoWars. I mean, it may be that they're just beyond. But you have diversity in sort of, not that much racial diversity, but you have diversity in sort of take advantage of it. And I think I will leave with that. So good luck.